Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of The Destiny of Manufacturing. Special thanks to our sponsors, the Precision Metalforming Association and the PMA Educational Foundation. I am your host, Dean Phillips, and today we've been graced with the presence of Roy Hardy. He comes to us from the Precision Metalforming Association, and he is the president, and I would like to thank him for taking the time to be here today.
Dean, it's a pleasure.
It's great to have you. And so I know a little bit about you, but I'd like you to tell our audience about it.
Okay. A little background. I'm a father of four, 50-something, a metallurgical engineer, and I've been part of the Precision Metalforming Association now for 90 days. So we're about ready to take the tags off.
That's great, and we're glad to have you. We're glad to have you at the PMA and glad to have you being able to steer the ship, so to speak. We really appreciate all your hard work, and I know it takes a little while to get everything ramped up, but I'm sure it'll be a great ride.
Well, there's a little bit of drinking out of a fire hose at this point, but it's a great organization with great staff and fantastic members, so I'm really looking forward to the next few years.
Great. So as our show works, one of the things that we do is we take a 5-year approach and a big picture look at where we're going. So what do you think as far as how did your career evolve to bring you to the PMA?
My grandfather and father were both in the metals world. My dad was a metallurgist. And so when I had the opportunity to tour where they worked as a kid, I said, I want to get into this metals thing. So I'm a graduate metallurgical engineer and have been involved in the metals industry since, I guess I'll go ahead and say it, the late 70s. Oh, my God. But it's a great industry. It's a great field. I have found that most everyone in it are genuine, hardworking, what I would call people who really care about the industries that they work in. And so because of that, they want to make it better. And in general, I think people at PMA and at some of the other industries I've worked for are all really concerned about making it better and leaving it better than what they found. So having been involved in that all these years, I've seen a lot of changes. In the late 70s, a lot of heavy industry in the U.S., I think it's fair to say quality was not as important then because there wasn't a lot of international competition. And we saw what happened to that in the 80s and 90s when a lot of our industry really had their lunch taken from them as people from international organizations came to North America. So the industry's really changed a lot, whether it's the making of the steel or all of the supply chain. A lot of the companies that you and I grew up with, and you're kind of my vintage, a lot of those companies are gone. And part of it's competition. Part of it is we took our eye off the ball. So I think that what has happened is that manufacturing in the United States has gotten more competitive. We've gotten smarter. And I think that that's going to continue to evolve. In order to be competitive against some of the competition now around the planet, you have to really bring your A game. And I'm happy to say that I think a lot of the companies that are still in existence are doing that now. So I think it's an exciting time, actually, to get into what I'll call manufacturing.
That's great. I think you hit it on the head, too, that the technologies have changed from where they were in the past, and we have to be willing to embrace that difference. We have to be willing to take that next leap. In most industries, you see these, you don't jump, it isn't just a straight curve line going up. What it is these jumps. It's a jump and another jump and another jump. And I think that's where we are right now. We are on the cusp of another huge jump with the new technologies that we have, servo presses and things like that. And I think that's great. What I did want to ask you is where do you think we'll be in 5 years? What do you see changing?
Well, I think that, part of what you hear a lot about now is this idea of the Internet of Things. And so, and you and I talked a little bit before we started this idea that equipment can now talk to other equipment and come with additional material that they need. Or a piece of equipment can tell someone who's monitoring maybe an entire facility, hey, in 3 months I've got a bearing that's going to go. Or this idea that everything is now connected. And I think that people in the supply chain are going to be connected to each other. And so the end user will be able to see and know and actually comment on how is everything moving in the supply chain. So I think that that's going to be a big change. The other thing I think is, and as I visit members of PMA, I see a lot more automation. And so I think that it leads to better consistency with the product, but there's also that concern of, well, what's happening to all the people that used to do that job? So, but I think automation, and I think that's part in response to what we've done in the manufacturing world of not making ourselves attractive to young people to come into the field. And so that's one of the things that PMA wants to help address.
That's a very good point, and it leads me to, I guess, a next area of focus that is a concern is for 5 years from now. What do you see as some of the areas that we can do to address our workforce challenges? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that we're getting to the point where the retirees of our last generation mm-hmm. are going to be replaced by the millennials and beyond. And how do we address the training issue mm-hmm. and attracting them to the industry? Yeah,
you're right. As the boomers now are all retiring out, the first problem there is we're losing all that tribal knowledge. So all that experience is just walking out the door, and they're walking out every day. So we need to figure out a way to how to capture some of that and to share it. Some come back as consultants. A lot of those folks are just leaving, never to be seen again. And so that's an issue. In addition to that, this idea of how do we get young people into the industry, we've done a very good job in this country for a couple generations telling our young people in the education system and even parents who had wonderful careers in manufacturing, I don't want my children to get into this. And so what's happened is we have millions of young people with degrees in art history and creative writing. Not that there's anything wrong with those. If you can hear my voice, I'm not saying those are bad things. But what do you do for a career with that? And so people who have had wonderful careers and bought their summer homes and went on vacations and have told their children, don't get into manufacturing. I don't know what the end game is with that, because now people have degrees, they're unemployable, they don't have skills that they need. And I have children that are just now coming out of high school, and I've got a 12-year-old still. This next group seems to understand I need a career, and that doesn't necessarily mean I need to go to school. That maybe trade school or apprenticeship or actually getting a job and learning and getting trained in what I need. So my 19-year-old son, some of his buddies are doing that. And I'm very encouraged by that because I think that's what the country needs.
I think that where you're pushing that discussion is a place that we all have to continue to talk mm-hmm. about. It is the elephant in the room.
Right.
The tool and die departments have screamed for years, we need more tool and die people. Mm-hmm. And the response that we've seen from a lot of the manufacturing industry colleges, either university level or 4-year colleges, is, well, we train people for machining and things
right.
like that. And as anybody who's been in tool and die knows that it is not the same thing. Tool
right.
and die is not machining. You can't just say that if you're trained as a machinist, you understand tool and die, because you have to understand materials.
Yep.
You have to understand how the equipment is going to act upon those materials. Mm-hmm. And our industry has a challenge with that to try and find people, not only, as you'd mentioned, bringing that tribal knowledge to a new generation. It is a dark science, if you will. People in tool and die, most
right.
of it was apprenticeships.
Yep.
And there's a lot of companies now that have realized that challenge and are addressing that internally to have apprenticeships,
right.
bringing people in. And some of the schools nowadays, I've even seen, are starting to build tool and die programs. And that is a change that I haven't seen in a long time. There are schools here, specifically in Tennessee, that have where you're training for tool and die, where they're training for press room operators. And the audience for that is both the companies who are bringing in, they're saying, hey, we want our people to go and get trained in this program. And also that's where the workforce is coming from.
Right.
And it doesn't have to take the 4-year path. It does give you another opportunity. So I think you've hit it right on the head with where we're having to go in order to accomplish that workforce challenge that we have.
Well, and I think that there's several studies out on how short we're going to be of engineers in the United States, and it's hundreds of thousands. I don't think there's been enough work done on identifying or trying to count noses on how many people we're going to need for tool and die and operators, because we all know that there's a problem, but I don't think anybody really understands how big the problem is. And if we could identify that, maybe then the bells would really start ringing on, this is a crisis now. But again, part of the response to that has been some automation. But in the end, you still need people who can think and create and then manufacture and make these tools and the dies that we need. And so there's software, there's various products now that assist in that. But in the end, I think you need people. And so we need to attract people. And I think one of the things that PMA is trying to do, and other organizations as well, is start to even reach into middle schools. And again, expose. When I was a kid and got a chance to walk around where Dad and Grandpa worked and see metal being poured and twisted and all that, that gave me a window into, geez, I'd be really interested in that. Well, I've got a twin brother. He had no interest in that at all. But I was exposed to it. Kids now have no exposure. We need to throw them on school buses. We need to give them tours. We need to walk around. And we don't need millions and millions. And so if we could wander 100 kids through a shop, and 3 of the 100 say, hey, I want to do that, that begins to solve our problem. But again, parents and schools, we got rid of workshop in schools. I mean, kids don't even know which end of a hammer to hang on to anymore. And so I think we've got to go back into even the middle schools and reintroduce this idea of working with your hands. It's a wonderful career. And we're looking for the ones that the spark goes off and says, hey, I think I'm interested in that. We need to grab them and get them some training through apprenticeship. And if you're 20, 21 years old and you're making $50,000 or $60,000, you got a new car, and your buddies are still in school racking up college debt, I mean, you look pretty smart at that point.
You got that right. I think when I was in school, I went to a vocational high school, and that school doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And that's a sad situation.
It really is.
It is a big part of the reason why I got into my career in controls manufacturing, because of the opportunity of I was exposed to it in high school. I did not gain that exposure at college as an electronics engineer. It's just they don't transfer very well, those skill sets. And I found that my background in high school carried me a lot further.
Interesting.
So it's quite a difference, though, that as far as the millennials that we have coming out, and a lot of them, having gone to a VEX robotics competition and some of the other robotics ones, that's where I see some shining lights.
No question.
The kids that get an opportunity to see that, the light bulb has gone off for them. They've worked with their hands. They see the opportunity that's there. 3D printing, a lot of the kids going into that. And where do you think, what opportunities can you say to a high school student that's coming out? What opportunities can you show him and say, hey, there are jobs. There's not only a job, but a career path for you.
Right. Well, we've got a couple of things working for us when it comes to that. I have a house full of millennials, and so they're not all tattooed and sleeping in the basement and playing video games all day. It appears to me that the millennials have actually fractured into 2 or 3 different groups. And the good news is there's so many of them that I think our answer lies in that group or 2 who said, no, I want to go to work, I want to have a career, and a significant number want to work with their hands. So I think it is about just exposing them to that. And I think that PMA right now is investing in some online training. So we're taking a lot of our old materials and actually going to put them up on the cloud, and they're going to be available. Members will be able to use that then for their own apprenticeship. As you know, it's difficult to have a real apprenticeship program without the classroom time.
Right.
And we've already touched on those schools are teaching that. There's not enough students. And depending on where you are, if you're in a metropolitan area, maybe you could pull together enough students that a technical school would start a program. But most of our members are sprinkled all over the country. But what if you could get all that classroom time online, relevant, from your association, and then you do your own on-the-job training? So I'm hopeful with that, and I think that once these materials become available, we will be able to attract. I think that if everyone really makes an effort and is intentional about bringing young people into our facilities, I think there's hope, and I'm very positive over the future.
Yeah, I think when we've had events for Manufacturing Day, when those manufacturers see these students come to these events and participate, or a maker fair, another illustration of what these kids can do when they're focused on what the opportunities are. I think that programming, there's a lot of opportunities now in programming, 3D printing. Those are things that are exciting for a lot of the kids to get into, and it leads into a career path.
Correct.
And I think the hardest part that I see is companies keeping people too. What can you speak to how you think that the PMA and the members of the PMA can focus on career paths?
Right. Well, I think one of the things that, and it's even true of us old guys, when a company invests in you, then they're demonstrating that they value you and think you have a future. So PMA has some programs where younger people in organizations, whether it's the Management Development Academy or some of the other programs that we have, that when a company can spot what we'll call either a future high flyer or they're already, you can see, no, I want to invest in this guy, that if they make that investment, then I think those people will stay because they recognize that the company recognizes that they have a future. If we treat people that we're trying to hang on to, I don't want to say as cattle, but really sort of not really putting any investment in them, at that point they're just going to move on. And because of all the jobs that are currently open, I mean, they have an opportunity to do that. You and I have lived through some times where there wasn't a lot of empty slots, so we were happy to hang on to the job that we have. But because the boomers are all exiting, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. So I think that organizations need to invest a little more. Now, you'll hear the story that millennials want trophies for everything and they got to get a balloon and all that. I don't think that's true. But they are looking for the recognition that, okay, you see my talent and now you're going to invest in me. And I think that's something companies can do then.
I think that's a great learning tool that companies within our industry can learn from, is how do you take and present that to somebody who's just coming in. I'll use the illustration. It's more of a cultural thing, but you look at how Japanese workforce is. When you go to work for a company in Japan, it's very rare that they leave and choose another path. And some of it is cultural, but the other part of it is that they know that if I stay on this path, there is an end game that I'm trying to achieve.
Right.
Do you think that that's something that we have to embrace as an HR department thing?
A little bit, but I think one of the strengths in America is that we do have the freedom and people can think outside the box. And think of all the industries that have started and companies started in the U.S. when a guy was working at a place and he had an idea and he went to the boss and the boss like, we're not going to do that. And you stay there a little longer and you're like, man, I could do this. And in the United States, you can walk across the street, open a little shop, and now you've got a business. So I think that as organizations and through HR, we need to invest in people, but not to the point where we lose that entrepreneur spirit. Because I really think, and I had this conversation with someone earlier today, if the government would get off of small businesses back, and I won't say anything more because someone might be listening, but if government would just get out of the way, the entrepreneurial spirit and the get-going spirit that we have in the United States, no one can compete against that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, and I'm preaching to the choir, I know, we're handcuffed. And it's just, for God's sakes, just get out of my way and let us do this. I think that would really help. That's a different discussion.
Yeah, I think that when you look at that spirit, I think one thing that a lot of the millennials is they do want to try something. Mm-hmm. They do have that spirit to, because they've been encouraged to, hey, you should follow your dreams.
Yep.
And that isn't a bad thing. Right. I think that's a great opportunity. You can be something. Mm-hmm. You can be more than what somebody else may have told you.
Right.
You can achieve. You can succeed. And that's, I think, where we almost have to, in some ways, encourage that and drive that to be. We don't have 50 engineers. We've got 50 entrepreneurs.
Right. And if a company has that attitude and encourages fresh new ideas, that's another way that they can keep their staff, is that if I have an idea, that they'll listen and implement, rather than hear from the old guy in the corner. That's not how we do it here. Go over and do what you're supposed to be doing. Stop thinking and just push that button. I mean, you're going to lose a lot of employees like that.
Yeah, I agree. And we're just about at our time limit here. I did want to, what I'm going to do is give you the opportunity to tell me, what do you think a company today can do to reach their 5-year goals?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they need to make stretch goals. I think that for a company to be successful, they need to look into the future and not just try to do what we're doing today a little bit better, but is there something completely new we can do? So be creative, and so have stretch goals, and then really commit to it. Again, on the HR side with your people, if you need new equipment, if there's training that the people that you have need to be able to achieve that. All these things cost money. And sure, everybody's got a lot of money laying around, but I think it is about investment, and not just in equipment, but in the people as well. Make a stretch goal, and then really figure out what do we need to do to make that, and then don't be afraid to step out and go for it.
That's a great point. Thank you, Roy. I do appreciate you taking the time
Dean,
with us today.
Fun. Thanks.
We want to thank everybody. This will air when you hear it. It will be Manufacturing Day, because that's when we're going to launch this. And please continue to listen and subscribe to our podcast. We're going to have an opportunity to win some prizes. And again, we'd like to thank the Precision Metalforming Association for sponsoring our podcast here today. And please tune in to the Destiny of Manufacturing in the future. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.